I sat on the couch in my quiet apartment around midnight, reading a book, when a sudden, heavy knock echoed off my front door, making me jump. I wasn't expecting anyone at this hour, and my mind instantly went through every bad scenario as I walked toward the entrance. When I opened the door, a cold gust of wind blew inside, and there she stood, my childhood friend Maya, shivering in a thin light jacket with a massive bruised violet mark under her right eye and a torn red suitcase resting near her feet. We hadn't spoken a single word to each other in 5 long years, ever since she cut off all contact and disappeared into a wealthy life with her controlling fiancé. My jaw dropped as I stared at her pale, trembling lips, and before I could even process the shock of seeing her again, she looked up with glossy, tear-filled eyes and whispered, "I didn't know where else to go but you." My instincts took over before my brain could even ask 100 questions, and I instantly pulled her inside, shutting the heavy wooden door tight against the freezing night. Her hands were ice cold, shaking so violently that she couldn't even unbutton her coat. So I helped her strip off the wet layers and guided her to sit on the couch. I rushed to the kitchen, poured a hot cup of black tea, and placed it between her trembling fingers, watching as she stared blankly into mug, like a broken shadow of the energetic, smiling girl I grew up with. For 5 whole years, I had held a quiet bitterness in my heart, believing she had simply abandoned our friendship the moment she found someone richer. But seeing her like this, completely destroyed and terrified, made all my resentment melt away into a deep, agonizing pain. I took a quiet breath, sat down next to her, and asked her softly what happened and why she had chosen to show up at my door after all these years. Maya took a small sip of the tea, her voice cracking as she confessed that her perfect, fairy tale life was actually a 5-year nightmare of physical control and emotional abuse. Her ex-fiancé, a powerful guy named Marcus, had isolated her from every single person in her past, taking away her phone, her money, and her independence, using her family's debt to keep her trapped in his mansion. Tonight was the very first time she found a small window of opportunity to escape. She had unlocked the back door while he was asleep, grabbed a suitcase filled with old documents, and ran 3 miles to the dark streets without looking back. She looked at me with deep guilt in her eyes, crying softly as she admitted that out of everyone in the world, I was the only person who had ever made her feel safe, which was why her instincts drove her straight to my apartment tonight. I moved closer, holding her shaking shoulders, and told her that she was safe now, and that no one was ever going to hurt her again under my watch. Maya closed her eyes with a heavy sigh of relief, leaning her head against my chest, as if she had finally found a place to rest after a long war. But just as the room settled into a heavy, quiet peace, her old red suitcase suddenly slid an inch on the floor, emitting a faint, steady red blinking light from deep inside the side zipper pocket, and my blood instantly ran cold as I realized Marcus had already tracked her straight to my front door. My heart dropped into my stomach as I stared at that tiny, pulsating red light hidden in the pocket of her red suitcase. I didn't say a word to scare Maya, but I slowly stood up, walked over the bag, and unzipped the side compartment with trembling fingers. Deep inside, wedged between her old clothes, was a small, sleek GPS tracking device, still blinking rhythmically in the dim light of the room. My mind raced with pure panic. She hadn't escaped Marcus. He had intentionally let her run away so she would lead him straight to the only person who could ever help her, turning my apartment into his ultimate trap. Before I could even warn Maya to get her shoes on so we could run, the quiet night outside was shattered by the sharp, metallic sound of a heavy car door slamming shut right beneath my balcony. Maya gasped, her eyes flying open as she instantly recognized the engine sound outside. She scrambled off the couch, backing into the dark corner of the living room, her face completely drained of color as she covered her mouth to stop herself from screaming. I crept toward the window, pulling the curtain back just half an inch to peek outside into the dimly lit street. A black SUV was parked right beside my entrance, and a tall, broad man in a dark coat stepped out into the night, staring directly up at my third-floor window with a cold, terrifying smile on his face. It was Marcus. He didn't rush to break down the door, and he didn't call the police. Instead, he simply reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his phone, and dialed a number. A second later, the phone in Maya's hand began to vibrate violently in the dark. She almost dropped the device on the floor, her whole body shaking as she looked at the screen. showing an incoming call from Marcus. I walked over, grabbed the phone from her hand, and swiped to accept the call, putting it on speaker so I could hear what we were up against. Marcus's deep, calm voice filled the quiet living room, laced with a sickening sense of satisfaction. He told us that he knew we were both standing near the window, and he mockingly thanked Maya for leading him straight to the guy she used to talk about in her sleep. He told me that if I opened the door right now and handed Maya back to him, he would let me walk away untouched. But if I refused, he warned that he had already sent a team to my mother's small house across town, and one phone call from him would ruin my family's life forever. The air in the room grew so heavy that I felt like I couldn't breathe. Maya looked at me with fresh tears streaming down her face, her chest heaving as she begged me to just let her go back with him so he wouldn't hurt my mother or me. She reached for the door handle, willing to sacrifice her own freedom and safety just to protect me from the monster she had brought to my doorstep. But seeing her step toward that nightmare triggered a sudden, fierce fire inside me. I grabbed her arm, pulled her back into the living room, and brought the phone close to my mouth. I told Marcus that he was a coward who could only control people through fear, and then I ended the call right in his face, locking the deadbolt on the door. But as I turned to hide Maya in the back room, a sharp, heavy thud hit my front door, followed by the terrifying sound of keys slowly turning inside my lock from the outside. My blood ran cold at the sound of that key turning in the lock. I grabbed Maya's wrist and pulled her into my bedroom, pushing her toward the small fire escape window in the back, while telling her to stay completely quiet. My hands were shaking, but my brain was working on pure adrenaline. I ran back to the front door just as it creaked open, and Marcus stepped inside like he owned the place, holding a duplicated master key he had somehow gotten from my apartment building's corrupt landlord. Two heavy-set men stepped into the hallway right behind him, blocking the only exit. Marcus adjusted his dark leather gloves, looked around my modest apartment with pure disgust, and asked me where Maya was, his voice calm and terrifyingly cold. I stood my ground in the middle of the living room, blocking the hallway to the bedroom, and told him that she wasn't here and that he needed to get out before I called the police. Marcus chuckled, stepping closer until he was just inches from my face, towering over me. He told me that the police in this town were on his payroll, and no one was coming to save either of us. He nodded to his two men, who immediately pushed past me, shoving me hard against the wall as they headed straight for the bedroom to search for Maya. I tried to fight back, swinging my fist at one of them, but the other grabbed my arms from behind, pinning me against the wall, while Marcus stood in front of me with that sickening, smug smile, enjoying every single second of my helplessness. One of his men kicked open the bedroom door and yelled back that the window was wide open and she was gone. Marcus's smile instantly vanished, replaced by a sudden violent rage. He grabbed me by the front of my shirt, slammed me back against the wall, and raised his fist, demanding to know where she went. But just as he was about to strike me, a sharp sound echoed to the living room. It was the sound of my apartment building's heavy fire alarm ringing at full blast, accompanied by bright flashing strobe lights in the hallway. Seconds later, heavy boots came pounding up the stairs, and two police officers in full uniform burst through my open front door with their guns drawn, shouting for everyone to put their hands in the air. Marcus and his men froze in shock, slowly raising their hands as the officers pushed them to the ground and slapped handcuffs on their wrists. I stood there, leaning against the wall and gasping for air, completely stunned by what was happening. As the officers let a furious, silent Marcus out into the hallway, Maya stepped out from behind the door of the small hallway closet, right next to the entrance. She had never gone down the fire escape at all. She had opened the window to trick them hid in the closet, pulled the building's main fire alarm, and dialed emergency services from a backup phone she had hidden in her jacket pocket the whole time. She walked over to me, her body trembling with a mix of fear and relief, and dropped to her knees beside me, wrapping her arms tightly around my neck as she burst into heavy, silent tears. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her close into the quiet safety of the living room. The nightmare that had haunted her for 5 long years was finally over, right here in the small apartment where her journey to freedom had just begun. A few weeks passed, and the heavy shadow that had hung over Maya's life finally dissolved for good. With Marcus behind bars, facing charges of stalking, extortion, and illegal break-ins, his hold over her was completely broken. Maya's family debt was handled through proper legal channels, and for the first time in 5 long years, she was truly, unconditionally free. We stayed in my apartment, but it no longer felt like a hiding spot or a refuge from a storm. The heavy locks on the door weren't there to keep monsters out anymore. They were just part of a cozy home we shared together. The silence in the living room wasn't suffocating anymore. It was filled with late-night chats, the aroma of fresh morning coffee, and the easy, effortless laughter we hadn't shared since we were kids. One quiet evening, as rain tapped softly against the window pane, Maya sat on the rug, going through her red suitcase to finally organize her things. She pulled out an old, faded photograph of the two of us from middle school, both of us grinning wildly with ice cream smeared on our faces. She looked up at me, a soft, genuine smile gracing her lips, the kind of smile I thought I'd never see again. She held up the picture, her eyes glistening with warmth, and admitted that when she ran away that night, she was terrified I would resent her for vanishing 5 years ago. I walked over, sat down beside her on the floor, and gently took the photograph from her hands. I looked her dead in the eye and told her that no matter how many years passed, or how far she went, my door, my heart, would always be open for her. She leaned her head against my shoulder, holding my hand tight, as the quiet warmth of a brand new beginning settled around us.